If you hope to drag your reader through the entire length of your story from beginning to end without their interest waning or lagging, it would be well advised for you to use some inventive language. Try and put your words together in a way that they have not necessarily been put together before. Try to avoid cliches. Try to avoid saying things. Try to avoid using phrases that every other writer that you've ever read has used. There are ways of constantly making your language more adventurous, more surprising. I think that is a big element of it. It's the element of surprise, that as the readers are going along, they will suddenly have their attention captured by a surprising image, a startling use of words. One of the ways that you can achieve this is by the principle of juxtaposition. If you put two words together that seem perhaps initially to be dissonant or discordant and not really to fit together, then that will be a technique by which you can occasionally create a kind of beautiful disfigurement, as in the phrase, beautiful disfigurement. Now, H.P. Lovecraft has got a reputation as being a very old-fashioned writer who hated modernism in any form. He loathed Gertrude Stein. He wrote a very funny parody of T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land called Waste Paper, which showed that he at least understood modernist poetry, even though he affected to despise it. But I think that H.P. Lovecraft was probably a closet modernist. One of the things that he's most often criticised for is his ridiculous, overblown use of adjectives, generally talking about a creature which he will eventually describe as indescribable. My friend, the writer Michael Moorcock, has called H.P. Lovecraft that master of over-describing the indescribable, which I can see what Mike means, but I don't think that that's entirely the truth of the matter. Looking at Lovecraft, I can see that he was actually using language in a very determined way. He would overload descriptive adjectives upon some of his creatures, some of his creations, so that it would make it impossible for the reader to put together a clear mental picture. His first mention of his most famous monster, the great Cthulhu, he spends a lot of time telling you three things that Cthulhu doesn't quite look like. In his other story, The Dunwich Horror, he has one of his loathsome, subhuman creatures who goes by the name of Wilbur Whiteley. When he is finally destroyed in an incident involving dogs in a library, he describes the dying body of Wilbur Whiteley by looking at different parts of it and describing them. He describes one part as covered in thick hair. Another part is bubbling with tentacles. There are eyes in the hips. Basically, he is giving you so many conflicting textures that you cannot possibly put these together into one single image. It's a way of alienating the reader. It's a way of estranging the reader and making the reader feel that something is wrong. These are some of the ways that you can use language effectively in unusual ways, which will greatly spice up anything that you are writing. It brings to mind one of the marvellous tricks that William Shakespeare used. And I don't know how he did this, but with modern brain imaging techniques, we have been able to hook up people's brains so we can see what kind of patterns of activity are being activated, and then give them some Shakespeare to read. It turns out that one of the things that people like most about Shakespeare is his wordplay. There was a phrase, I'm not sure which book or play this was from, but the phrase was, "Wouldst thou lip aboard?" Now what Shakespeare's done here is he has changed a noun into a verb, i.e. he's used the word lip to mean kind of kiss. Wouldst thou kiss? Wouldst thou lip aboard? Board, he has taken the word bawdy, which is an adjective, and he's changed it into a noun. Bawdy, so a board in context would mean a loose woman, a strumpet, a harlot, something like that. But when Shakespeare does this stuff, it turns out our neurology goes crazy. It becomes really excited because something unusual is being done with language, and practically our entire consciousness is made of language. So by messing about with it, Shakespeare is able to excite our neurons. And he only does this, and he must have done this instinctively because he didn't have brain imaging technology, but he only does this just before an important dramatic denouement. He gets our brains primed with his clever wordplay so that they're excited, they're up for something, they want something exciting to happen, and then he gives us his big dramatic resolutions. This is the power of language over our minds. If we alter the mode of the language, if we mess about and translate it into something that we don't quite understand, then we become very neurologically excited. It's a bit like, say, the writings of James Joyce, where he was doing all of this incredibly intricate stuff with the actual words themselves. Or in some ways, it's like believers in magic or magicians. They will often say that you should use barbarous names. What they mean is you should make your spells in a language that you do not personally understand. That can be Latin, it can be English, it can be anything. The important thing is when we're using language that we don't understand, our minds go all over the place. They enter into a much more receptive state. As an example of how, say, the writings of James Joyce can affect our consciousness, I would point out my own experience when I was writing my novel Jerusalem and had for some reason decided to do a chapter all about James Joyce's daughter, Lucia Joyce, when she was confined at a mental institution in Northampton for the last 40 years of her life. And I decided to have all of this in the language of her father, which meant that I was inventing nearly every word in the story. My spell checker was having a mental breakdown. And it took me a couple of months to write this stuff. And after I'd finished it, I couldn't even think in proper English anymore. My mind had become so conditioned to making up new words out of everything that I was unable to have a basic conversation. I had to take 18 months off publishing an underground magazine before I could get back to the book and write in proper English again. Now, fortunately for you, as a would-be writer, this is not going to be a problem for a long time yet, or at least I would hope so. But be warned, this could be waiting for you some point down the line when you have degenerated to the level that I have degenerated to. One of my favourite movements in literature, and this has perhaps got limited application, but I still feel that it's very important, is the Oulipo movement. Now, Oulipo is a contraction, I believe, of the French term ouvrir littéraire potentiel, an open potential literature. What this is in effect is setting restraints upon what you can write that are meant to force you into new creative decisions. The most famous piece of Oulipo is a novel by Benjamin Perec, which is written entirely without the letter E. So he only chooses words that don't have E in them. Now, you think how difficult it would be to complete a single sentence without the most used letter in the language? Taking this further, I saw a very, very slim book by somebody called Christian Burke, B-O-umlaut-K, and it was called eunoia. Now, eunoia is an interesting word in itself. It's the etymological opposite of paranoia, so it means beautiful thinking. It's also the shortest word in the English language to contain all of the vowels. And what Christian Bock does in this work is each chapter, which he has decided has to contain a journey by water, a meal, a sexual debauch, and various other elements in each chapter. Each chapter, he can only use one vowel. I believe he has an extra chapter for the letter Y because that's almost a vowel. But this is, as a feat of writing, it is breathtaking. Now, obviously, this is not going to be something that you're going to be called upon to do at any point, but it is something that I would advise you to perhaps play with occasionally if you get the time, because it can stretch your talents into directions that you would not have thought of on your own. It will create new possibilities of language that you can enrich all of your prose with. This will be a benefit to anything that you are writing. And as a final indication of what you can do with, say, even extremist Oulipo techniques, people have used Oulipo techniques to compose music. They have used them to create works of art, and they have even used them for specific kinds of writing. There are, I believe, people who write police procedural novels according to Oulipo tactics, and this movement is referred to as the Oulipopo. So, not for everybody, but if you want to give your writing some real exotic spice, I suggest that you perhaps take a couple of idle hours to play around with some of those ideas and see where it takes you.